The wind howled across the Nebraska plains like a wounded animal, carrying with it the bitter taste of alkali dust and the promise of another harsh winter. Sarah McKenna stood at the window of her small wooden cabin, watching the sun bleed crimson across the horizon, painting the barren landscape in shades of rust and gold. It was the same view she'd watched for 3 years now, ever since Pa died of the fever and Ma followed him 6 months later, worn down by grief and the relentless prairie. She was 23 years old, though the mirror showed a woman who might have been older, sun-weathered skin, calloused hands, and eyes that held too much sorrow for her years. The nearest neighbor, old Mrs. Hutchinson, lived 4 miles east, and the town of Redemption Creek was a full day's ride on horseback. Out here, loneliness wasn't just a feeling. It was a physical presence that sat heavy on your chest like the summer heat. As darkness crept across the land, Sarah moved with practiced efficiency through her evening ritual. She checked the water barrel, half full, enough for another week if she was careful. The root cellar held preserved vegetables from her small garden, dried beans, and precious strips of jerked beef. Her father's Winchester hung above the fireplace, cleaned and loaded, a constant reminder that a woman alone on the frontier was prey to more than just wolves and coyotes. With steady hands, she lit the kerosene lantern that hung from the porch beam. The glass was cracked along one side, mended with candle wax, but it still cast its yellow glow into the gathering darkness. She adjusted the wick until the flame burned bright and clear, then stepped back to ensure it was visible from the trail that wound past her property. "For you, Thomas," she whispered into the wind, the same words she'd spoken every night for 2 years, "so you can find your way home." Thomas McKenna had left in the spring of 1878 to join a cattle drive heading to Montana. He'd promised to return by winter with enough money to fix the barn roof and maybe even hire some help for the harvest. But winter came and went, and with it came only silence, the last anyone had heard. There'd been trouble near the Yellowstone, conflicts with rustlers, maybe worse, some said Indians, though Sarah knew better than to believe every tale that drifted down from the north. She pulled her shawl tighter against the October chill and lingered a moment longer on the porch. The lantern swayed gently in the breeze, casting dancing shadows across the hard-packed earth. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack, the sound both mournful and savage. Sarah knew that sound well. It was the voice of the frontier itself, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Inside, she stoked the fire in the iron stove and set about preparing her simple supper, cornbread and beans, the same meal she'd eaten countless times before. As she worked, she tried not to think about the townspeople's whispers, the sideways glances when she rode in for supplies. A woman alone, they said. It wasn't natural, wasn't proper. Some of the men looked at her with a calculating gleam that made her grateful for Pa's rifle and the Colt .45 she kept hidden in her apron pocket. Just last month, Samuel Morrison from the general store had cornered her near the grain bins, whiskey thick on his breath, suggesting she might need a man's protection. She'd shown him the business end of her pistol and reminded him that McKenna women had been protecting themselves just fine since her grandmother crossed the Mississippi in a covered wagon. He'd backed off, but she knew the talk would only grow worse with time. The beans were nearly ready when she heard it. Hoofbeats on the trail, slow and uneven. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to the rifle, her body tensing. Visitors after dark rarely brought good news. She moved to the window, peering through the gap in the flour sack curtains. A lone rider approached, slumped forward in the saddle. The horse moved with the exhausted gait of an animal pushed too hard for too long. As they drew closer to the circle of lantern light, Sarah could make out few details. A dark coat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. Her heart leapt for just a moment before reality crashed back down. The shoulders were too broad, the frame too large. This wasn't Thomas, but something made her pause before reaching for the rifle. The way the rider swayed, barely keeping his seat. The dark stain she could now see spreading across one side of his coat. This wasn't a man coming to cause trouble. This was a man in trouble. She watched as the stranger's horse stopped of its own accord near her porch, too tired to go further. The rider lifted his head with obvious effort, and in the lantern's glow, she caught a glimpse of a face carved by hardship, sharp cheekbones, several days' worth of stubble, and eyes that seemed to hold all the darkness of the prairie night. "Please," he said, the word barely more than a rasp. Then he slid from the saddle and hit the ground with a sound that made Sarah wince. For a long moment, she stood frozen, torn between the instinct to help and the knowledge that opening her door to a stranger could mean her death. But as she watched him try to push himself up on trembling arms, only to collapse again, something in her chest twisted. She thought of Thomas, somewhere out there in the vast wilderness. What if he needed help? What if some other woman stood behind a door, deciding his fate? The wind picked up, setting the lantern to swaying more violently. Its light danced across the fallen man's face, and she saw his lips moving, forming words she couldn't hear. Blood had begun to pool beneath him, dark against the pale dirt. Sarah made her decision. She grabbed the rifle, checked that her pistol was secure in her pocket, and unbarred the door. The night air hit her like a slap, cold and sharp with the scent of approaching winter. She approached the stranger cautiously, rifle pointed at his still form. "Mister?" She prodded him with her boot. "Mister, can you hear me?" He groaned, eyes fluttering open briefly. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 years old. The blood was coming from his left side, and his breathing was shallow and labored. "Not Rustler," he managed. "Not gonna hurt." Sarah almost laughed at that, as if he could hurt anyone in his current state. But she kept the rifle trained on him as she knelt, using her free hand to check for weapons. She found a Navy Colt in his holster, which she quickly removed, and a knife in his boot. No badge, no papers that she could immediately see. "Can you stand?" she asked. "I can't carry you." He nodded weakly and, with her help, managed to get to his feet, together. They stumbled toward the cabin, him leaning heavily on her smaller frame. She was acutely aware of the impropriety of it, a strange man's arm around her shoulders, his body pressed against hers for support. But property meant nothing when death was scratching at the door. Inside, she helped him to Pa's old chair near the stove. In the better light, she could see his face more clearly. Weathered, yes, but with a kind of harsh handsomeness that spoke of hard living rather than age. His clothes, though dusty and blood-stained, were of decent quality. Not a drifter then, but not a lawman either. She'd bet. "Need to look at that wound," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. He nodded, fumbling with his coat buttons until she batted his hands away and did it herself. The shirt beneath was soaked with blood. She'd seen wounds before, helped Pa doctor injured ranch hands, tended her mother through her final illness. But this was different. This was a stranger, bleeding in her kitchen while the night pressed against the windows like a living thing. As she worked to clean and examine the wound, a deep gash along his ribs, maybe from a knife, she was aware of him watching her. His eyes, she noticed, were an unusual gray, like storm clouds over the prairie. "The lantern," he said suddenly, his voice stronger than before. "Saw it, from the trail, like a star. Thought I was dreaming." Sarah's hand stilled for a moment. "It's for my brother," she said quietly, "so he can find his way home." The stranger's eyes flickered with something, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of the kind of loss that shaped a person. "He's lucky," he said, "to have someone waiting." Sarah returned to her work, wrapping the cleaned wound with strips torn from an old petticoat. She didn't tell him that luck had nothing to do with it. That waiting was just another word for the slow death of hope, that every night she lit that lantern. A little more of her faith guttered out like a candle in the wind. Outside, the coyotes had grown bolder, their cries closer now. The stranger's horse whinnied nervously, and Sarah knew she'd have to tend to it soon. But for now, she focused on the task at hand. on the steady rise and fall of the wounded man's chest, on the simple act of keeping death at bay for one more night. As she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the cosmos. The lantern she'd lit for her brother had guided someone else to her door, someone who might be salvation or damnation or something in between. In the frontier, she'd learned, those lines were often blurred beyond recognition. The wind continued its assault on the cabin walls, and somewhere in the darkness, fate was already weaving the threads that would bind their lives together in ways neither could imagine. The stranger slept fitfully through the night, fevered murmurs escaping his lips while Sarah kept vigil from Pa's rocking chair. She dragged it to the corner where she could watch both him and the door. The Winchester across her lap and the coat within easy reach. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows like skeletal fingers trying to find a way in. Near dawn, his fever broke. Sarah had dozed off despite herself, jerking awake when she heard him stirring. His gray eyes were clearer now, taking in his surroundings with the careful assessment of a man accustomed to waking in unfamiliar places. Water? His voice was hoarse but steady. She fetched him a cup from the pitcher, watching as he drank slowly, his hands trembling only slightly. In the pale morning light filtering through the curtains, he looked less like a dying man and more like trouble waiting to happen. "I should thank you," he said, setting the cup aside. "Not many would take in a stranger bleeding on their doorstep. Not many are fool enough to be alone out here," Sarah replied, keeping her distance. "What's your name?" He hesitated, just long enough for her to notice. Jake Garrett." "Well, Mr. Garrett, you've got some explaining to do. That's not a wound from falling off your horse." A wry smile touched his lips. "No, ma'am, it's not." He shifted, wincing at the movement. "Had some trouble near Chimney Rock. Men I'd rather not meet again. Law trouble? The other kind." Sarah studied him. This man who'd appeared from the darkness like something out of a dime novel. His clothes, she noticed again, were well made beneath the trail dust and blood. His boots were quality leather, his gun belt crafted by someone who knew their trade. Whatever Jake Garrett was, he wasn't a common drifter. "You're not my brother," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. "So why did the lantern guide you here?" Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of a deeper question. "I saw the light from miles off," he said slowly. "Been riding hard for 2 days, trying to stay ahead. That light looked like hope itself burning in all that darkness. Maybe your brother's not the only one who needed finding." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks and turned away, busying herself with stoking the stove. "You can rest here today," she said, her back to him. "But come tomorrow. You'll need to move on. I've got no business harboring fugitives." "I'm no fugitive, ma'am. Just a man who chose the wrong side of an argument." She turned back to face him, arms crossed. "In my experience, Mr. Garrett, men who ride through the night bleeding from knife wounds aren't usually on the right side of arguments." He conceded the point with a slight nod. "Fair enough, but I give you my word. I mean you no harm. Soon as I can sit a horse properly, I'll be gone." Sarah wanted to demand more answers, but exhaustion was creeping back into his features. She'd gotten what she needed for now, a name, real or not, and the promise of departure. The rest could wait. "There's cornbread from last night," she said. "I'll heat some beans. You need to eat if you're going to heal." As she worked, she was acutely aware of his presence in her small space. It had been 3 years since a man who wasn't kin had been inside these walls. The cabin felt smaller somehow, the air charged with an unfamiliar tension. They ate in relative silence, broken only by the clink of spoons against tin plates. Jake managed most of his portion, though she could see the effort it cost him. When they finished, he made to stand, presumably to help clear, but she waved him back. "You'll tear my needlework if you're not careful," she said, "and I'll not waste good thread on foolish pride." He settled back, watching as she moved about the kitchen. "You've been alone here long?" "Long enough. Your brother, is none of your concern." The sharpness in her voice surprised them both. Jake raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "My apologies. I've forgotten the manners my mother tried to beat into me." Despite herself, Sarah felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "Where was home, Mr. Garrett? Before you took to bleeding on strangers' doorsteps?" "Virginia, originally, but that was a lifetime ago. Been moving west since the war ended. Never found a good enough reason to stop." "The war?" She said it flat, a statement rather than a question. That explained some things, the way he moved, the careful watchfulness, the skill with which he'd stayed alive despite his wound. "I was young," he said, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. Sarah thought of all the men she'd known who'd come back from that war changed, carved hollow by things they'd seen and done. Her own uncle had returned missing his left arm and most of his soul, drinking himself to death within 2 years of Appomattox. A knock at the door shattered the morning quiet. Sarah's hand went immediately to the pistol in her apron as Jake tensed, his own hand moving instinctively toward where his gun should have been. "Mrs. McKenna?" The voice belonged to Reverend Davies from town. "I saw smoke from your chimney. Wanted to check you were faring well." Sarah shot Jake a warning look and moved to the door. The Reverend stood on her porch, tall and austere in his black coat, eyes that missed nothing taking in her appearance. "Reverend," she said, not opening the door fully. "I'm well. Thank you for asking. The Morrison boy mentioned you were in town last week. Said there was some unpleasantness." Sarah's jaw tightened. Of course Samuel Morrison would run to the Reverend with his version of events. "Nothing I couldn't handle." "A woman alone faces many trials," the Reverend said, trying to peer past her into the cabin. "The church could help find you a suitable position in town, perhaps as a seamstress or—" "I appreciate your concern." Sarah cut him off. "But this is my home. I'm not leaving it." The Reverend's face pinched with disapproval. "Pride goeth before a fall. Mrs. McKenna, and winter's coming. How will you manage?" A crash from inside the cabin cut him short. Sarah's heart lurched as she heard Jake's muffled curse. "What was that?" The Reverend stepped forward. "Just the cat," Sarah said quickly, blocking his path. "Knocked over the water pitcher. Clumsy creature. Thank you for stopping by, Reverend. But I've got cleaning to do now." She could see the suspicion in his eyes, the questions forming. But propriety won out. He couldn't force his way into a woman's home. Not without cause. "I'll pray for you, Mrs. McKenna," he said finally, the words sounding more like a threat than a blessing. "And I'll be watching." Sarah waited until his wagon was well down the trail before closing and barring the door. She found Jake on the floor by the chair, the water pitcher in pieces around him, fresh blood seeping through his bandages. "Damn fool," she muttered, helping him back up. "What were you thinking?" "Heard voices," he gasped. "Thought maybe the men who are after me. The only thing after you right now is infection if you keep tearing open that wound." She fetched fresh bandages, trying to ignore how her hands shook. "That was Reverend Davies. He'll spread word all over town that something's amiss here." "I'm sorry. I should go." "You should sit still and stop making things worse." She peeled back the bloodied cloth, relieved to see the wound itself wasn't too bad. "Though you're right about one thing. You can't stay here long. The Reverend's like an old woman when it comes to gossip, and the town already thinks I'm half savage for living alone." As she worked, Jake caught her wrist gently. "Why did you take me in, really?" Sarah looked down at his hand on hers, calloused, scarred, but gentle. She pulled away. "I told you, I thought about my brother, out there somewhere. But you knew I wasn't him. You said so yourself." She was quiet for a long moment, focusing on rewrapping the bandage. "Maybe I'm tired of being alone," she said finally, so soft he almost missed it. "Maybe even dangerous company is better than another winter of talking to ghosts." Jake said nothing, but she felt his eyes on her as she finished her work. Outside, clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising rain or maybe early snow. The lantern on the porch swayed in the rising wind, its glass chimney singing a mournful note. "Tell me about your brother," Jake said eventually. Sarah hesitated, then found herself talking about Thomas and his big dreams, his restless spirit that couldn't be contained by farm life, about the cattle drive that promised adventure and fortune, about 2 years of silence that spoke louder than any words. "He's dead," she said finally, the first time she'd spoken it aloud. "I know it. Deep down, I've known for months. But every night you light the lantern." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Hope's a hard thing to kill," Jake said quietly. "Sometimes it's all that keeps us moving forward." Sarah looked at him then, this stranger who'd crashed into her carefully ordered world. There were secrets in those storm-gray eyes, darkness that matched her own. She wondered what hopes he carried, what ghosts drove him through the night toward a stranger's light. "Get some rest," she said, standing abruptly. "I need to tend your horse and secure the barn before the weather turns." As she stepped onto the porch, she paused by the lantern. In daylight, it looked ordinary, just glass and metal and old memories. But come nightfall, she knew she'd light it again. For Thomas, yes, but maybe for other reasons too. Maybe Jake Garrett was right. Maybe her brother wasn't the only one who needed finding. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and change. Sarah pulled her shawl tight and headed for the barn, aware that her small, predictable world had shifted on its axis. A stranger had followed her light home, and nothing would ever be quite the same. The days that followed took on a strange rhythm, like a dance where neither partner knew the steps. Sarah maintained her routines, morning chores, tending the chickens, checking the fence line, but always with one eye on the cabin where Jake Garrett recovered. He kept to himself mostly, reading her father's old almanacs or staring out the window at the endless prairie, lost in thoughts she couldn't fathom. Trust came neither easy nor quick. Sarah slept with a Winchester beside her bed and kept the Colt in her apron during the day. Jake noticed, she was sure, but said nothing. He moved carefully around her, announcing himself when entering a room, keeping his hands visible. It was the considerate caution of a man who understood what it meant to be wary. On the 4th day, she returned from gathering eggs to find him on the porch, attempting to repair a loose board with her father's tools. "You'll tear those stitches," she said, though without much heat. "Already did, yesterday." He looked up with a rueful grin. "Fixed them myself. Your sewing lessons were quite thorough." Fool man. But she set down the egg basket and crouched beside him, examining his handiwork on both the porch and himself. The wound was healing clean, she had to admit. "Where'd you learn to doctor yourself?" "Same place I learned to knead it." He tested the board. "Now secure. This place is well built, but it needs maintenance. Your father's work." "Him and Thomas, mostly. I helped when they'd let me." She stood, brushing dust from her skirts, which wasn't often. Said I had woman's work to tend to. Yet here you are, tending it all. There was no pity in his voice, just observation. Sarah appreciated that. She'd had enough of pitying looks from townspeople to last a lifetime. That evening, she made stew with the last of the preserved beef, adding wild onions she'd gathered from near the creek. They ate in companionable silence until Jake set down his spoon with deliberate care. "Those men who are after me," he began. "They might still come this way. I figured as much. You have a right to know why." Sarah studied his face in the lamplight. "Do I want to know?" "Probably not. But you should." He rubbed his jaw, choosing his words. "I was hired to guide a wagon train through to Oregon. Good money. Seemed straightforward enough, but the man funding it, Silas Cunningham, he wasn't interested in homesteading. He was running guns to sell to whoever would pay. Indians, outlaws, didn't matter to him. And you didn't know this when you signed on. I had suspicions, but I needed the money, and I told myself it wasn't my business what cargo we carried." His laugh was bitter. "Turns out it becomes your business real quick when federal marshals show up. I tried to do the right thing then, told the marshals what I knew. Cunningham found out. His men caught up to me near Chimney Rock. Sarah digested this, adding hot water to her tea. So you're a wanted man after all? By Cunningham. Yes, the law. That's more complicated. The marshals want me as a witness, but Cunningham has reach. Money buys a lot of silence out here. And you came here. I came here dying. The light just happened to be yours. He met her eyes. I'll leave tomorrow. You've risked enough. With Cunningham's men possibly on your trail, you wouldn't make it 10 miles. Sarah surprised herself with the vehemence of her response. No, you'll stay until you're properly healed. Then you can ride off to get yourself killed somewhere else. Something shifted in his expression. Why does it matter to you what happens to me? The question hung between them like morning mist. Sarah found herself thinking of the empty chairs at her table, the silence that pressed against the windows at night, the way she'd started talking to the chickens just to hear a voice. Maybe it doesn't, she said finally. Maybe I'm just tired of death winning all the time. That night, she heard him moving about the cabin, restless as a caged wolf. She lay in her bed, listening to the floorboards creak under his weight, and wondered what dreams drove him from sleep. Her own were troubling enough, Thomas calling her name across vast distances, his voice fading no matter how hard she ran toward it. Come morning, she found Jake had already stoked the fire and put coffee on. He stood by the window, watching the sunrise paint the grassland gold. Riders, he said quietly, about 2 miles out. Sarah's blood chilled. She moved beside him, squinting against the light. 3 men, moving slow but steady toward the cabin. Cunningham's? Can't tell from here. He turned to her, face set. Get your rifle. If it's them, I'll go out to meet them. No reason for you to— No! The word came out sharp as winter wind. This is my land, my home. We face them together or not at all. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. Instead, he checked the loads in his Navy Colt, moving with practiced efficiency despite his healing wound. The riders came on steady, and as they drew closer, Sarah's tension eased slightly. She recognized the lead man's paint horse, the familiar slouch in the saddle. It's Jim Harper from the Double Bar Ranch, she said, and his boys. Jake didn't relax. You know them well? Well enough. Harper's been trying to buy my land for 2 years. She smoothed her hair, straightened her apron. Let me do the talking. They met the riders in the yard. Jim Harper touched his hat brim, his weathered face giving away nothing. His sons, Seth and Daniel, flanked him like matching bookends, both eyeing Jake with open suspicion. Morning, Mrs. McKenna, Harper said. Heard you had some trouble out here. No trouble, Mr. Harper, just the usual. That's so. His gaze slid to Jake. Don't believe I know your friend. My cousin, Sarah said smoothly. Jake McKenna, from Missouri. Come to help with winter preparations. Cousin, Harper chewed the word like tobacco. Funny. I don't recall you mentioning family in Missouri. So, I don't recall mentioning much of anything about my family to you, Mr. Harper. The rancher's eyes narrowed, but he kept his tone conversational. Well, seeing as you've got help now, maybe you'll reconsider my offer. $300 is more than fair for this piece. The answer's still no. Winter's coming, Mrs. McKenna. It'll be hard enough with 2, and your cousin doesn't look like he's in shape for heavy work. Jake stepped forward then, moving with dangerous grace despite his injury. I appreciate your concern for my cousin's welfare, he said, his voice carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. But McKenna's have been taking care of their own since before your outfit staked its first claim. We'll manage. Harper's son Seth shifted in his saddle, hand drifting toward his sidearm. Jake's stance altered subtly. Ready. The moment stretched taut as fence wire. Seth! Harper's voice cracked like a whip. The younger man froze. We're just being neighborly here. No call for unpleasantness. He looked back at Sarah. You change your mind. My offer stands. But it won't stand forever. I won't change my mind. Harper studied them both for a long moment, then touched his hat again. Ma'am, Mr. McKenna. He wheeled his horse, his sons following. They watched until the riders disappeared over a rise. Only then did Jake's shoulders relax, though Sarah noticed him press a hand to his side. You're bleeding again, she said, worth it to see Harper's face, but he let her lead him inside, sinking into a chair with poorly concealed relief. $300. That's robbery for good bottomland with water access. You know land values? She fetched her medical supplies, trying not to think about how natural this had become. I know enough. Also know Harper won't give up easy. Men like him never do. Sarah unwrapped his bandages, pleased to see only minor bleeding. Men like him have been trying to drive me off since Pa died. I'm still here. You are. Jake agreed quietly. Though I wonder sometimes what it costs you. She looked up sharply, but his expression held no condescension, only understanding. It unsettled her more than mockery would have. As she worked, he asked, Why cousin? Why not hired hand? Hired hands don't sleep in the house. Cousins might, if they're family enough. She tied off the fresh bandage. Besides, blood kin fights harder than hired help. Harper knows that. Clever. Necessary. She gathered the soiled bandages. Though now I'll have to explain to the whole county why my Missouri cousin showed up shot and bleeding. Hunting accident, Jake suggested. I'm notoriously careless with firearms. Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling. Yes, I can see that about you. Very careless indeed. That afternoon, while Jake rested, she caught him watching her as she worked on mending. Not with the calculating look she'd grown accustomed to from men in town, but with something quieter, more thoughtful. What? She asked finally. You're different than I expected. Expected? When I saw the light, I thought maybe I'd find some old homesteader. Or a family, not, he gestured vaguely, not a stubborn spinster defending her empty kingdom. Not someone brave enough to be alone, but wise enough to hate it. The words hit closer to home than she cared to admit. Sarah focused on her stitching, though her hands weren't quite steady. We all do what we must. No, Jake said softly. Most people do what's easy. You do what's right, even when it's hard, especially then. She looked up to find him still watching her, those storm-gray eyes holding something that made her chest tight. The afternoon light slanted through the window, casting shadows that seemed to pull them closer even as they sat apart. You don't know me, she said, but the protest sounded weak even to her. I know enough. He stood, moving to the window. I know you light that lantern every night for a brother who's probably dead. I know you faced down Harper when most would have taken his money and run. I know you took in a stranger who could have brought nothing but trouble to your door. And did bring trouble. Yes. He turned back to her. Which is why I should leave. Tonight. Before what? Sarah set aside her mending, rising to face him. Before Harper comes back? Before your Cunningham finds you? Or before we... She stopped, heat flooding her cheeks. But Jake crossed the space between them, standing close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. Before we what? Sarah? It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his rough voice did something to her insides she didn't care to examine. You know what? She whispered. I do. His hand rose as if to touch her face, then dropped. Which is why I should go. You've built something here, Sarah McKenna. Something clean and honest. I won't be the one to wreck it. Maybe it needs wrecking. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Maybe I'm tired of clean and honest and empty. Maybe... A sound outside made them both freeze. Horses, moving fast. Jake pushed her behind him as he moved to the window, gun appearing in his hand as if by magic. How many? Sarah asked, her own hand finding the rifle. Just one. His tension eased fractionally. Riding hard, though, like the devil's on his tail. They waited, watching the rider approach. It was a young man, barely out of his teens, on a lathered horse, He pulled up hard in the yard, looking around wildly. "Mrs. McKenna," he called. "Mrs. McKenna, you home?" Sarah recognized him then, Tom Bradshaw from town, who sometimes helped at the telegraph office. She opened the door cautiously. "What is it, Tom?" The boy's eyes were wide with excitement and fear. "Message came through, ma'am, about your brother, about Thomas McKenna. He's alive, ma'am. He's alive and coming home." The words hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Sarah gripped the doorframe, her knuckles white, while Jake stood silent behind her, a shadow with storm cloud eyes. "What?" she breathed. "Tom, what did you say?" The boy dismounted, pulling a crumpled telegram from his vest pocket. "Came through this morning from Fort Laramie. Says Thomas McKenna's in the hospital there. Says he's asking for his sister Sarah." He thrust the paper at her with trembling hands. "Mr. Henley at the telegraph office. He remembered you asking about your brother. Told me to ride out quick as I could." Sarah took the telegram, the paper crackling in her shaking hands. The words swam before her eyes. Thomas McKenna, recovering, seeks sister Sarah. Fort Laramie Hospital. "There's more, ma'am," Tom continued, shifting nervously. "Message says he was found half dead with some survivors from an Indian attack up near the Yellowstone. Been recovering for months. Lost his memory for a time. Only just remembered who he was." The world tilted. Sarah felt Jake's hand steady her elbow, grounding her. She read the telegram again, then once more, as if the words might change. "Thank you, Tom," Jake said when Sarah couldn't speak. He pressed a coin into the boy's hand. "You did right, riding out here fast. Best water your horse before heading back." Tom nodded, glancing curiously between them before leading his mount to the trough. Sarah remained frozen in the doorway, the telegram clutched to her chest. "Sarah," Jake's voice was gentle. "Come inside." She let him guide her to a chair, her mind spinning. Thomas alive. After all this time, all these nights of lighting the lantern, he was alive. "I need to go to him," she said suddenly, standing so fast the chair scraped against the floor. "I need to. Fort Laramie, that's how many days?" 4, maybe 5 if you push hard. Jake caught her hands as she reached for her father's map. "Sarah, wait. Think this through. Think what through? My brother's alive." But even as joy surged through her, she saw something in Jake's expression that made her pause. "What?" "It's convenient timing," he said carefully. "Right after Harper's visit, right after—" "You think it's a trap?" The thought was ice water on her elation. "I think you need to be careful. Telegraph offices aren't always secure. Messages can be faked." Sarah sank back into the chair, the telegram now feeling heavy as lead. "But what if it's real? What if Thomas is lying in that hospital, waiting for me?" "Then we'll get you there safely." Jake moved to the window, checking the yard where Tom was still tending his horse. But not alone. Not with Harper circling like a vulture and Cunningham's men possibly in the area. "We?" Sarah looked up sharply. "You can barely ride with that wound." "I can ride well enough?" His jaws set in a way she was beginning to recognize. "You saved my life. Sarah McKenna, I won't let you ride into danger alone." Before she could argue, Tom knocked on the door. "Ma'am, I should be heading back." Sarah composed herself and saw him off, pressing her own coin into his palm despite his protests. When his dust had settled, she turned to find Jake already gathering supplies. "We can't both leave," she said. "The stock, Mrs. Hutchinson." Jake interrupted. "Your neighbor to the east. Would she tend them for a few days?" "Probably, but then we leave at first light. Take only what we need. Travel fast." He paused in his preparations. "Unless you'd rather go alone." Sarah thought of the miles of open country between here and Fort Laramie, the river crossings, the possibility of Harper's men or worse along the trail. Pride warred with practicality. "No," she admitted. "I'd rather not go alone." Something flickered across Jake's face. Relief, perhaps, or satisfaction. Then we'd best prepare. I'll check the horses. Make sure they're fit for hard travel. You pack what we'll need: food, ammunition, medical supplies. They worked through the afternoon with quiet efficiency. Sarah tried not to think about what they were doing, preparing to ride off together like what? Not family, despite her lie to Harper. Not employer and hired hand. Something undefined and dangerous in its lack of definition. As evening approached, she rode to the Hutchinson place. Mrs. Hutchinson, a weathered woman of 60 who'd buried 2 husbands and raised 5 children on the frontier, took the news with her usual practicality. "Course I'll tend your stock," she said, eyeing Sarah shrewdly. "This cousin of yours going with you?" "Yes." Mrs. Hutchinson's expression said she wasn't fooled for a minute. "You be careful, girl. Hope can make fools of the wisest folks." "What do you mean?" "I mean, dead men don't usually send telegrams, but men who want something from a woman alone sometimes do." The words followed Sarah home like a cold wind. She found Jake had already saddled both horses and packed their saddlebags with military precision. Her father's Winchester was cleaned and loaded, extra ammunition within easy reach. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, reading her expression. "Mrs. Hutchinson thinks it might be a trap." "Mrs. Hutchinson sounds like a smart woman." Jake checked the cinch on his saddle. "But we're going anyway." "Yes." Sarah moved to light the lantern, her nightly ritual. "We're going anyway." They ate a simple meal, both lost in thought. As darkness fell complete, Sarah found herself studying Jake in the lamplight. The hard planes of his face had become familiar, even comfortable. She wondered what would happen after Fort Laramie. If Thomas was there, alive, real, what place would there be for Jake Garrett in her life? And if he wasn't— "You're staring," Jake said without looking up from the gun he was cleaning. Heat flooded her cheeks. "Just thinking. About what happens next. After—" She hesitated. "You'll leave, won't you? Either way." He set down the gun with careful deliberation. "Sarah, no, I understand. You have Cunningham to deal with, a life somewhere else. This was just a stop along the way, a light in the darkness. Like you said." Jake stood abruptly, chair scraping. He crossed to where she sat, crouching before her so their eyes were level. "Listen to me," he said, voice rough. "I've been drifting since the war ended. 13 years of not caring much where I woke up or why. Then I saw your light, and for the first time in all those years, I wanted to stop running." Sarah's breath caught. "Jake, let me finish." His hands found hers, calloused thumbs tracing her knuckles. "I don't know what we'll find at Fort Laramie, but I know this, trap or truth. I'm not leaving you to face it alone, and after—" He paused, seeming to choose his words. "After, we'll see what comes next. Together, if you'll have me." The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Sarah felt herself leaning forward, drawn by something stronger than propriety or sense. Jake's eyes darkened, and his hand rose to cup her cheek. A sound outside made them spring apart. Jake was at the window in 2 strides, gun in hand. Sarah grabbed the rifle, heart pounding for entirely different reasons now. "What is it?" she whispered. "Not sure. Thought I saw movement by the barn." He eased the door open a crack. "Could be nothing. Could be." The shot came from nowhere, splintering wood inches from Jake's head. He yanked Sarah down as more shots followed, shattering the window and sending glass cascading like deadly rain. "Cunningham?" Sarah gasped. "Or Harper. Doesn't matter now." Jake overturned the heavy table, creating cover. "Can you reach the back door?" "Yes, but—" "Go. Get to the horses. I'll cover you." "I'm not leaving you!" Another volley of shots punctuated her words. Someone shouted from outside. She couldn't make out the words, but the intent was clear. "Garrett." The voice was rough, unfamiliar. "We know you're in there. Come out and face justice like a man." Jake's laugh was bitter. "Justice? That what they're calling it now?" "Who are they?" Sarah demanded. Could be Cunningham's men, could be bounty hunters. Cunningham might have put a price on my head. He checked his ammunition. Either way, they're not here to talk. The shooting had stopped, but Sarah could hear movement outside. Multiple men surrounding the cabin. Her home had become a trap. "Jake Garrett," the voice called again. "You've got 1 minute to come out, or we burn you out. Your choice." Sarah's blood chilled. Fire was every homesteader's nightmare. The cabin would go up like kindling. Everything she had. "They're bluffing," Jake said, but she heard the doubt. "No." She gripped her rifle tighter. "No, they're not. I can smell the kerosene." Jake cursed viciously. His mind was clearly racing, calculating odds. "All right. I'll go out the front, draw their fire. You slip out the back, get to the horses." "Stop." Sarah's voice was steady as her hands. "This is my home, my land. We stand together or not at all. Remember?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them. Understanding, respect, and maybe something deeper. "Together then," he said. "But we do this smart. How well do you know your land in the dark?" "Every rock and gully." "Good, because we're going to need that knowledge." He outlined a plan quickly, efficiently. It was desperate, probably foolish, but it was better than burning. They prepared swiftly, Sarah's heart hammering against her ribs. As Jake reached for the door, she caught his arm. "Jake, in case we don't—" He silenced her with a kiss, fierce and brief and full of promise. "We will," he said against her lips. "We will." Then he was gone, throwing the door wide and diving into the darkness as gunfire erupted. Sarah counted 3 breaths, then slipped out the back, rifle ready, into a night that had transformed her home into a battlefield. The barn loomed ahead, horses whinnying in fear. She could hear Jake returning fire, keeping their attackers focused on the front of the cabin. Her job was to reach the horses, get them ready. A figure stepped from behind the water trough, rifle aimed at her chest. Well, Garrett's got himself a woman." Sarah didn't hesitate. She swung her rifle like a club, catching him across the jaw. He went down hard, and she grabbed his weapon, now armed with 2 rifles and desperate hope. Flames were beginning to lick at the cabin's walls. Her home, her parents' dream, going up in smoke, but there was no time for grief. Jake needed her. She worked her way around the barn, using every bit of cover. The shooting from the front had intensified. How many were there? In the dancing firelight, she counted at least 4 men, all focused on the front where Jake had taken position behind the well. Sarah raised her rifle, sighting carefully. Her father had taught her to shoot for food, not killing. But these men had come to her home with death in their hearts. She fired. Her shot struck true, sending one of the attackers sprawling. The others spun toward her position, and suddenly she was diving for cover as bullets whined overhead like angry hornets. The barn wall splintered behind her, and Sarah pressed herself flat against the earth, tasting dirt and fear. "There's another shooter!" someone yelled. "Circle around." Jake took advantage of their confusion, his Navy Colt barking in the night. Another man fell, crying out. But the cabin was truly burning now, flames climbing the walls with terrifying speed. The light revealed everything, stripping away the advantage of darkness. Sarah scrambled to new cover behind the chicken coop, her mother's carefully built structure that had weathered 15 Nebraska winters. She could hear boots approaching, measured steps of men who knew their business. Her hands were steady on the rifle, though her heart threatened to burst from her chest. A shadow moved to her left. She fired without thinking, heard the curse and stumble of a wounded man. But her muzzle flash had given away her position. Wood exploded around her as return fire sought her life. "Sarah!" Jake's voice carried over the chaos. "The horses!" She understood immediately. Their only chance was to run, to leave everything behind. The thought was a knife in her gut, but death was worse. She broke from cover, sprinting for the barn as bullets tracked her movement. Jake was there suddenly, appearing from smoke and shadow. He grabbed her arm, pulling her into the relative shelter of the barn. His face was smudged with soot and gunpowder, a graze bleeding along his temple. "You hit?" he asked urgently. "No, you?" "I'll live. Can you get them saddled while I hold the door?" Sarah didn't waste words. She worked with desperate efficiency, her hands finding buckles and straps by feel in the dim light. The horses were wild-eyed with terror, but they knew her touch, her voice. Jake fired steadily from the doorway, making their attackers cautious. "How many left?" she called. 3, maybe 4, but they'll rush us soon. That fire's going to bring every man within 10 miles. Sarah finished with the last strap. "Ready. Mount up. When I say, ride hard for the creek. Don't stop for anything. What about you? I'll be right behind you." He reloaded swiftly. "Trust me, Sarah." She wanted to argue, but there was no time. She swung into the saddle, gathered the reins of Jake's horse. The barn door loomed before them, freedom and death equally likely beyond it. "Now." Jake yanked the door wide, firing rapidly. Sarah spurred her mount forward, Jake's horse thundering beside her. She heard him vault into the saddle behind her, heard the shouts and shots of their pursuers. They burst from the barn at full gallop. The cabin was fully engulfed now. Her entire life turned to a pillar of fire that lit the prairie for miles. Sarah didn't look back. She couldn't. More shots followed them, but the darkness swallowed them up. They rode hard, following paths Sarah knew by heart. Behind them, she could hear pursuit, not immediate, but determined. These men wouldn't give up easily. They splashed through Willow Creek, using the water to break their trail, then cut north toward a series of draws and gullies that Sarah had explored as a child. Jake rode silent beside her, but she could feel his presence like a shield at her back. Finally, miles from the burning cabin, Sarah pulled up in a grove of cottonwoods. The horses were lathered, breathing hard. Jake dismounted immediately, checking their back trail. "I think we lost them," he said. "For now?" Sarah slid from her saddle, legs trembling. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the full weight of loss crashed over her. Her home, her parents' graves, everything she'd fought to keep, gone in smoke and flame. "Sarah!" Jake's hands were on her shoulders, turning her to face him. "I'm sorry. This is my fault. If I hadn't come—" "Don't!" She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. "Just don't!" They stood in silence, the night pressing close around them. Somewhere an owl called, mournful in the darkness. Sarah thought of her lantern. Probably nothing but melted glass now. No more light to guide Thomas home. "The telegram," she said suddenly. "Do you think... was it real?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. The timing is suspicious, but maybe Thomas really is at Fort Laramie." She laughed, the sound brittle as dried leaves. "And here I am, running in the opposite direction with nothing but the clothes on my back. We'll circle around come daylight, approach the fort from the north." Jake moved closer, not touching but near enough that she could feel his warmth. "If your brother's there, we'll find him? If it's a trap?" "If it's a trap, then I've lost everything for nothing." "Not everything?" His voice was soft. "You're alive. That's what matters." Sarah turned on him then, anger flaring hot and bright. "Alive? What good is alive when everything I've worked for is ash? When the land my father cleared with his bare hands is stolen by men with guns and torches? When I don't even know if my brother—" Her voice broke. Jake caught her as her knees buckled, pulling her against his chest. Sarah fought for a moment, then collapsed into him. Months of rigid control finally shattering. She wept for her home, for her parents, for Thomas, for the brutal unfairness of a world that took everything and gave nothing back. Jake held her through it, solid and steady as stone. When her sobs finally quieted, he spoke into her hair. "I've lost everything before, more than once. Thought it would kill me, but it didn't. You know why?" She shook her head against his chest. Because losing everything means you've got nothing left to lose. Makes you free in a way most folks never understand. Free to choose what comes next without the weight of what came before. Sarah pulled back enough to see his face in the moonlight. Is that what you did after the war? For a while. Drifted. Took whatever work came along. Didn't care much about tomorrow. His thumb traced her cheekbone, wiping away tears. Then I saw a light burning in a window and thought maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe there were still things worth caring about. That light's gone now. No. His voice was fierce. No, it's not. It's right here. His hand pressed against her heart. You lit that lantern every night for 2 years. Sarah McKenna, that kind of hope doesn't die just because some bastards burned down a building. Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted to find that strength he seemed to see in her, but all she felt was hollow, scraped clean as old bones. We should keep moving, she said, pulling away. They'll start searching come daylight. Jake let her go, understanding in his eyes. They mounted up again, riding deeper into the broken country. Sarah led them to a box canyon she'd discovered years ago. Sheltered and defensible, they made cold camp, not risking a fire. Wrapped in saddle blankets, they sat back to back, sharing warmth and watching different approaches. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human suffering. Tell me about him, Jake said quietly. Thomas. What was he like? Sarah closed her eyes, summoning memory. Restless, always looking beyond the next hill, wondering what was there. Pa used to say he had wandering feet, could never stay still. She smiled despite everything. He taught me to shoot, said a woman ought to know how to defend herself. Pa was furious, but Thomas just laughed and kept teaching me. Sounds like a good brother. He is, she corrected herself firmly. When he left for that cattle drive, he promised he'd come back with stories and enough money to buy me a new dress. A blue one, he said, to match my eyes. Your eyes are gray. He was colorblind. The memory hurt and warmed in equal measure. Never could tell blue from gray. Used to drive Ma to distraction when she'd ask him to fetch something. They talked through the night, trading stories like trail rations. Jake told her about growing up in Virginia, about a world of proper manners and magnolia trees that seemed like something from a fairy tale, about how war had stripped it all away, leaving only survival. I did things, he said, staring into the darkness. Things that seemed necessary at the time but ate at me after. When it was over, I couldn't go home, couldn't face my mother's eyes and pretend to be the son she'd raised. So you came west. So I came west. New name, new life. Thought I could outrun what I'd done. His laugh was bitter. Turns out you carry your sins with you no matter how far you ride. Sarah understood that, the weight of failure, of not being enough, of lighting a lantern night after night for someone who might never see it. Dawn came gray and cold, matching her mood. They ate jerky and hard biscuits from Jake's saddlebags, washing it down with canteen water. Sarah's body ached from riding and sleeping on the ground, but worse was the ache in her chest every time she thought of her burning home. We need supplies, Jake said, studying their meager provisions. And information. There's a trading post about 15 miles northeast. Might be able to learn if anyone else has been asking about Thomas McKenna. It was risky, but necessary. They rode cautiously, Jake scouting ahead while Sarah hung back with the horses. The land here was rougher, broken by centuries of wind and water into fantastic shapes. Good country for hiding, but also for ambush. The trading post sat at a crossroads, a squat building of logs and sod that had seen better decades. Jake went in first while Sarah waited in a stand of scrub oak, rifle ready. He emerged 20 minutes later with a grain sack of supplies and a grim expression. Trader says 3 men came through yesterday, asking about a woman named McKenna. Said they were federal marshals looking for someone who'd helped a fugitive. Sarah's stomach dropped. They're ahead of us. Maybe they're fishing, seeing what turns up. Jake secured the supplies to his saddle. But there's more. Trader heard tell of a cavalry unit bringing wounded to Fort Laramie 2 months back. including a man who'd lost his memory. Hope flickered despite everything. Thomas? No way to know without going there. Jake swung into his saddle. But Sarah, if those men are watching the fort, then we ride into a trap. She considered their options. Unless we don't ride in at all. Jake raised an eyebrow, and Sarah felt a plan forming, desperate and probably foolish, but better than nothing. You said I need to choose what comes next, she said. Well, I choose to find out the truth, one way or another. Fort Laramie rose from the plains like a promise of civilization, its wooden palisades and stone buildings a stark contrast to the endless grassland. Sarah and Jake watched from a bluff 2 miles distant, studying the comings and goings through Jake's field glasses. Busy place, Jake murmured. Supply wagons, cavalry patrols, settlers heading west. Good cover for us, but also for anyone watching. Sarah's throat was tight with anticipation and dread. Somewhere behind those walls, Thomas might be waiting, or it might all be an elaborate trap, bait to draw her out. After 2 days of careful travel, avoiding main trails and sleeping cold, they'd finally reached their destination. There, Jake said suddenly, passing her the glasses. Northwest corner, by the sutler's store. 3 men, trying too hard to look casual. Sarah focused on the figures. They wore civilian clothes, but carried themselves like soldiers or lawmen. One kept checking a pocket watch. Another scanned faces in the crowd with sharp attention. The third lounged against a post, hand never far from the pistol at his hip. Could be the men from the trading post, she said. Could be. Question is, are they Cunningham's men or actual law? Does it matter? Either way, they're looking for us. Jake was quiet for a moment. Not us. Me. You could ride in alone. Find out about Thomas. They don't know your face. They burned my home. Jake, they know exactly who I am. Sarah lowered the glasses. Besides, we agreed. Together or not at all. That earned her a look she couldn't quite read. Stubborn woman. So I've been told. She studied the fort again. The hospital would be near the center, away from the noise. If Thomas is there, big if. Only one way to find out. Sarah outlined her plan. It was risky, requiring split-second timing and more luck than they probably possessed. But sitting here watching wouldn't answer any questions. They waited until late afternoon when the fort was busiest. A supply train had just arrived, and soldiers swarmed the wagons. Unloading goods, perfect chaos for cover. Sarah had traded her riding skirt for pants and tucked her hair under an old hat from Jake's saddlebag. From a distance, she might pass for a young man. Jake had rubbed dirt into his face and affected a limp, transforming himself into just another broken-down drifter. They approached from different angles. Sarah joined a group of settlers gawking at the fort's entrance, while Jake fell in with some buffalo hunters heading for the sutler's store. Her heart hammered as they passed through the gates, but the guards barely glanced at them. Inside was controlled chaos. Soldiers drilled on the parade ground while civilians conducted business at various buildings. Children ran between wagons. Women in calico dresses bargained for supplies, and the air rang with a dozen different languages. Sarah forced herself to move casually, just another face in the crowd. She'd spotted the hospital, a long, low building with windows propped open for air, but the watching men were positioned to see anyone approaching it. Then fate intervened. A fight broke out near the blacksmith shop. 2 teamsters going at each other with fists and curses. The crowd surged to watch, including 2 of the 3 watchers. Sarah didn't hesitate. She slipped through the chaos, ducking behind a water wagon, then darting to the hospital's side entrance. The door was unlocked. She eased inside, finding herself in a corridor that smelled of carbolic and human suffering. "Can I help you?" A woman in a nurse's apron appeared, stern-faced and efficient. Sarah's mind raced. "I'm looking for my brother, Thomas McKenna. I heard he might be here." The nurse's expression softened slightly. "McKenna, yes, we have a patient by that name, but visiting hours are—" "Please." Sarah let desperation color her voice. "Not difficult, given the circumstances." I've come so far. I just need to know if it's really him. The nurse studied her, taking in the travel-worn clothes, the shadows under her eyes. Very well, but just for a moment. This way. They walked past beds filled with the sick and injured, soldiers with fever, settlers with broken bones, the constant toll the frontier extracted. Sarah's heart climbed into her throat as they approached a bed near the windows. The man lying there was thin, gaunt, his hair longer than she remembered, but the shape of his jaw, the way his hands rested on the blanket. Thomas? The word came out strangled. His eyes opened, hazel like their mother's, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Then confusion creased his features. I'm sorry. Do I know you? The world tilted. Sarah gripped the bed frame to stay upright. Thomas, it's me, Sarah, your sister. He studied her face with no hint of recognition. I'm sorry. Miss, they tell me my name is Thomas McKenna, but I don't remember much before waking up here. The doc says it might come back, might not. Sarah's vision blurred. All those nights lighting the lantern. All that hope, and he didn't even know her face. She reached for his hand, and he let her take it. Polite but distant as a stranger. You taught me to shoot, she whispered. Behind the barn where Pa couldn't see. You said I should know how to defend myself. Something flickered in his eyes. That sounds familiar. Like an echo of something. He squeezed her hand weakly. I'm sorry. I want to remember. The nurses say people come sometimes, claiming to know me, but none of it feels real. Others have come. A few, men mostly, asking questions about where I'd been. What I remembered. His face darkened. They didn't feel right. Made the docs nervous too. Footsteps in the corridor made Sarah tense. She needed to go, but leaving him felt like tearing off a piece of herself. I'll come back, she promised. I'll help you remember. I'd like that, Thomas said. Even if I don't know you, it feels good, having you here. Sarah kissed his forehead, breathing in the familiar scent that no amount of hospital soap could erase. Then she was moving, slipping back through the corridors as voices rose behind her. Someone had discovered her presence. She burst from the side door to find chaos in the yard. Jake was in the middle of it, trading blows with one of the watchers while soldiers tried to separate them. She couldn't reach him without exposing herself. There! A shout from behind. The third watcher had spotted her. Sarah ran, dodging between wagons and horses. A hand grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around. She drove her elbow into the man's solar plexus, grateful for Thomas's long-ago lessons. He doubled over, gasping, but more were coming. She could see uniforms converging, hear shouts to stop. Then Jake was there, blood on his knuckles, catching her hand. This way! They plunged through the crowd, using the confusion to their advantage. A sergeant tried to block their path, but Jake bowled him over without slowing. They reached the horses. Jake had somehow gotten them inside the fort and vaulted into the saddles. Stop them! Someone was shouting orders, but the gate was just ahead, still open for the supply wagons. They thundered through, scattering pedestrians. Shots rang out behind them, but they were already beyond effective range, racing for the open prairie. Sarah looked back once to see men mounting up to pursue. They rode hard, Jake leading them into the maze of ravines and washes that cut through the landscape. Their pursuers fell back, unwilling or unable to match their desperate pace. Finally, miles from the fort, they pulled up in a cluster of wind-carved rocks. The horses were lathered, sides heaving. Sarah slid from her saddle and sat hard on the ground, overwhelmed. Was it him? Jake asked, dismounting beside her. She nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. But he doesn't remember me, doesn't remember anything. The words tasted like ashes. He's alive, but he's gone. The brother I knew is gone. Jake sat beside her, close but not touching. Memory's a strange thing. Sometimes it comes back when you least expect it, and sometimes it doesn't. Sarah drew her knees up, resting her forehead on them. I lit that lantern every night for a ghost, and now I found him, but he's still a ghost." They sat in silence while the sun sank toward the horizon. Sarah's mind churned with the cruel irony of it. Thomas alive, but lost to her anyway. Her home burned, her life destroyed, all for a reunion that couldn't happen. "The men at the fort," Jake said eventually. "They'll report back. Cunningham will know where we are. I don't care. You should. He won't stop hunting me. And now you're part of it." Jake's voice was heavy with regret. "I should leave. Draw them away from you." Sarah's head snapped up. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare leave me now! Sarah, no." She turned to face him fully. "I've lost my home. My brother doesn't know my face. You're all I have left, Jake Garrett. And if you think I'm letting you ride off to face those wolves alone, you don't know me at all." He looked at her for a long moment, something raw in his expression. "I'm no good for you. I bring nothing but trouble. Maybe I'm tired of being good. Maybe trouble is better than empty nights and dying hope." She reached out, touched his face. "Maybe you're exactly what I need." He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "You deserve better than a man with blood on his hands and prices on his head." "I deserve to choose, and I choose you." The words hung between them, heavy with promise. Jake pulled her close, and she went willingly, finding his lips with hers. The kiss was different from that desperate moment before the fire, deeper, slower, tinged with sorrow and fierce hope in equal measure. When they broke apart, the last light was fading from the sky. First stars appeared, cold and distant. Sarah thought of her lantern, how she'd hung it out night after night. But maybe Jake was right. Maybe the light wasn't in the glass and flame. Maybe it was in the choice to keep going, to keep hoping, even when the darkness seemed absolute. "What now?" she asked. "Now we run, head north, maybe Canada. Start fresh where Cunningham can't reach." Jake stood, pulling her up with him. "If you're sure." Sarah looked back toward Fort Laramie, where her brother lay in a bed with no memory of her face. Then she looked at Jake, this man who'd stumbled into her life bleeding and desperate, who'd stood with her against fire and lead. "I'm sure," she said. "But first, one more thing." She told him her plan, and he smiled, sharp and dangerous. "You're going to get us killed. Woman." "Maybe, but if we're leaving Thomas behind, I want to be sure he's safe, that those men won't hurt him looking for leverage." Jake considered, then nodded. "All right, one more roll of the dice, but after this, we disappear. Agreed?" "Agreed." They mounted up again, turning not north toward escape, but back toward danger, because Sarah McKenna had learned something in the past days. Sometimes the only way forward was through the fire, and sometimes the family you chose was stronger than the family you were born to. The stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. Sarah answered it in her heart, a wild cry of loss and defiance and stubborn, unquenchable hope. The moon was high when they circled back toward Fort Laramie, keeping to the shadows of the broken country. Jake had argued against returning, but Sarah's determination was iron. She wouldn't leave Thomas vulnerable to men who might use him as bait. They left the horses hidden in a dry wash and approached on foot. The fort was quieter now. Most soldiers in their barracks, only sentries walking the walls. Jake moved like a ghost beside her, years of survival teaching him how to be invisible. "There," he whispered, pointing to a campfire outside the fort's walls. "Civilian camp." Through the darkness, Sarah could make out several men around the fire. She recognized the watchers from earlier, plus 3 more, hard-faced men who wore their guns like old friends. 6 of them, Jake murmured. "Too many. We don't need to fight them all, just their leader." Sarah had been thinking during their ride. Cut off the head, and sometimes the snake grows a new one. But Jake was already studying the camp layout, calculating angles. "The big one by the fire, see how the others defer to him?" Sarah saw it, the subtle body language, the way conversation stopped when he spoke. A man used to command. That's our target, she agreed. They waited, patient as hunters. Eventually, nature called. The leader rose, stretched, and walked into the darkness to relieve himself. Jake moved instantly, Sarah following. The man was just buttoning his pants when Jake's gun pressed against his kidney. Easy, friend. No sudden moves. Garrett. The man's voice was calm, unsurprised. Figured you'd show eventually. Then you know what I want. Call off your dogs. Leave the woman and her brother alone. The man chuckled. Woman's got nothing to do with it. You're the one Cunningham wants. Worth $5,000, dead or alive. Then take me, but leave them out of it. Sarah stepped from the shadows, her rifle aimed at the man's head. No deals without me. The leader's eyes widened slightly. Mrs. McKenna, heard you were a fighter. Cunningham's boys said you put up quite a show before your place burned. Those were your men? Some of them. Though Harper paid half their fee, seems you had more enemies than friends. He shifted slightly, testing Jake's attention. The gun pressed harder. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah said coldly. You're going to walk back to that fire and tell your men the hunt's over, that you got word Garrett died in a rock slide north of here. Then you're going to ride out and never come near my brother again. Lady, you don't understand. Cunningham doesn't forgive. He doesn't forget. Even if I walk away, he'll send others. Then we'll deal with them too. Sarah's voice was steady as her aim. But tonight, you walk away, or you don't walk at all. The man looked between them, calculating odds. You kill me, my boys will hunt you to the ends of the earth. Maybe, Jake said. But you'll be too dead to enjoy it. Choose. Long seconds passed. An owl called somewhere in the darkness. Finally, the leader nodded slowly. All right, but this ain't over. Garrett, Cunningham's reach is long. They marched him back toward the campfire, guns ready. But as they neared the circle of light, everything went wrong. Boss, one of the men stood, hand dropping to his weapon. That you? It's me, the leader called. But we got company. The camp erupted. Men dove for cover, guns clearing leather. Jake shoved Sarah behind a boulder as bullets filled the air where they'd been standing. So much for negotiations, Jake muttered. Returning fire, Sarah shot back, trying to pin down the attackers. But they were outnumbered and outflanked. She could hear men moving in the darkness, trying to circle behind them. We need to move, she said. Can't, they've got us pinned. Jake's gun barked twice more. Should have listened when I said not to come back. Helpful, Sarah snapped, then froze as she heard something that chilled her blood. Horses, coming fast from the fort. Cavalry, Jake said grimly. Someone heard the shooting. They were trapped between Cunningham's men and the approaching soldiers. Sarah's mind raced, looking for options that weren't there. Then she heard it, a voice calling from the darkness. Familiar. Impossible. Sarah? Sarah McKenna. Is that you? Her heart stopped. Thomas? Her brother emerged from the shadows, unsteady on his feet but holding a cavalry carbine. Behind him, a squad of soldiers spread out, weapons ready. I remembered. Thomas called, voice stronger. After you left, it came flooding back. Everything. Sarah, I remembered. Get down, Sarah screamed as Cunningham's men opened fire on the soldiers. The night exploded into chaos. Cavalry carbines answered outlaw pistols. Men shouted orders, cried out in pain. Sarah found herself separated from Jake in the confusion, pressed against a different boulder as lead flew like hail. She saw Thomas advancing with the soldiers, moving with the easy confidence she remembered. Her brother, truly back. But he was exposed, too focused on reaching her. The leader of Cunningham's men saw it too. He raised his pistol, sighting on Thomas's back. Sarah didn't think. She stood, rifle swinging up. Time slowed as she squeezed the trigger, her father's lessons echoing across the years. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The leader spun and fell, his shot going wild, but another of his men had drawn a bead on her. Exposed as she was, Sarah saw the muzzle flash, felt the wind of the bullet past her ear. Then Jake was there, tackling her down as more shots sought their lives. They rolled behind cover as the firefight intensified. "Damn fool woman," he gasped. "Trying to get yourself killed?" He was going to shoot Thomas. "And now they're trying to shoot you." But his arm was tight around her, protective. The battle raged for eternal minutes. Then, gradually, the firing slackened. Cunningham's men, caught between soldiers and desperation, began to break. Two fled into the darkness. Another threw down his gun, hands high. The rest lay still. "Sarah!" Thomas's voice. "Closer now." She emerged cautiously, Jake beside her. Her brother stood 10 feet away, carbine lowered but ready. In the moonlight, she could see his face clearly, older, marked by hardship. But undeniably, "Thomas, you came back," she whispered. "You lit a light for me." His voice was rough with emotion. "Every night, the nurses said, even when everyone else gave up, you kept that lantern burning." Sarah took a step toward him, then another. Then they were embracing, clinging to each other while tears ran freely. He smelled of gunpowder and hospital soap. But underneath was her brother, truly and completely. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "Sorry I left. Sorry I took so long to come home. You're here now. That's what matters." When they finally separated, Thomas's gaze found Jake. "And you are?" "Jake Garrett." Jake's hand hovered near his gun, wary of the soldiers surrounding them. "I've been looking after your sister. The man worth $5,000. Thomas's expression was unreadable. "The one these bastards were hunting?" "The same." The brothers stared at each other, tension crackling. Sarah held her breath. Then Thomas extended his hand. "Any man who stands with my sister is good by me, though we'll need to sort out this bounty business." Jake shook his hand carefully. "It's complicated. Most things are out here." Thomas turned to the cavalry sergeant. "Sergeant Morrison, these two are under my protection. Anyone who wants them goes through me." The sergeant looked uncomfortable. "Tom, there's talk of federal warrants. Talk's cheap. These men attacked civilians. We defended ourselves." Thomas's voice brooked no argument. "Write it up however you need to, but Garrett and my sister ride free." It took another hour to sort out the aftermath. The surviving attackers were taken into custody. The dead were laid out for burial. Sarah learned that Thomas had discharged himself from the hospital against orders when he'd remembered everything and heard the gunfire. "Grabbed a gun and convinced Morrison's squad to follow me," he explained. "Told them you were in danger. Seems I was right. But your injuries? Mostly healed, head still foggy sometimes, but it's clearing." He looked at the smoldering ruins of what had been Cunningham's camp. "Sarah, I heard about the homestead, about what they did. It's gone." The words still hurt to say. "Everything Ma and Pa built. Not everything." Thomas gripped her shoulder. "We're still here. McKenna's don't give up easy." Dawn was breaking as they finally prepared to leave. The sergeant had agreed to report the incident as self-defense, though he'd warned Jake to stay clear of Fort Laramie in the future. "Where will you go?" Thomas asked as they stood by the horses. Sarah looked at Jake, then back at her brother. "North, maybe, somewhere fresh, where the past can't follow." "Together?" She nodded, feeling Jake's hand find hers. "Together." Thomas studied them both, then smiled, the crooked grin she remembered from childhood. "Ma always said you were too stubborn to settle for an ordinary life. Guess she was right." He pulled a leather pouch from his pocket, pressed it into Sarah's hands. "My army pay. It's not much, but it'll help you get started." "Thomas, no." "Yes, I've got a job waiting with Morrison's freight company. You've got nothing but what you're wearing." His voice gentled. "Let me do this, Sarah. Let me help light your way for once." Sarah hugged him fiercely, memorizing the moment. When she pulled back, Thomas was looking at Jake. "You'll take care of her. She takes care of herself." Jake replied, "But I'll stand beside her while she does it." Thomas nodded, satisfied. "Good answer." He stepped back. "I'll rebuild the homestead. When you're ready, There'll be a place for you both." "How will you find us?" Sarah asked. Her brother smiled. "Same way you found me. I'll light a lantern every night, so you'll know you can come home." They mounted up as the sun climbed higher, painting the plains gold. Cunningham's threat still lingered. Federal warrants might follow, but for now they were free. Sarah looked back once to see Thomas standing tall despite his ordeal, waving farewell. "You all right?" Jake asked softly. Sarah considered the question. Her home was ashes. Her brother was damaged but healing. She was riding into uncertainty with a man whose past was as scarred as her own. By any reasonable measure, she should be far from all right. But the sun was warm on her face. Jake's presence steady beside her. And somewhere ahead lay possibilities she'd never dared imagine. The light she'd tended so faithfully hadn't guided Thomas home. It had brought her something else entirely. A different kind of family. A different kind of future. "Yes," she said, meaning it. "I'm all right." They rode north as the day brightened, leaving the fort and its shadows behind. Somewhere, Silas Cunningham still plotted. Somewhere, danger still waited. But for now, there was just the vast sky, the endless grass, and the promise of tomorrow. Sarah had lit a lantern in the darkness, never knowing it would illuminate her own path. Now, with Jake beside her and hope rekindled, she rode toward whatever came next. The prairie stretched before them, wild and free and full of light. 3 weeks later, they stood on a rise overlooking a valley that seemed to stretch forever. The Montana Territory spread before them like a promise. Mountains rising purple in the distance, a river winding silver through grassland that rippled like a green ocean. "There," Jake pointed to a sheltered bend in the river. "Good water, natural windbreak from those bluffs. Soil looks rich." Sarah dismounted. Walking to the edge of the rise, the land spoke to something deep in her bones, the same way the Nebraska homestead had called to her parents. But this was different. Chosen rather than inherited. Built on hope rather than duty. "It's beautiful," she said simply. They'd ridden hard at first, putting distance between themselves and Cunningham's reach. Through Wyoming territory, skirting settlements, trading with trappers and friendly Indians. Jake's wound had healed clean, leaving only another scar in his collection. Sarah had learned to sleep under stars without walls around her, to find freedom in the very things she'd once feared. Along the way, they'd been married by a circuit preacher in a mining camp, a simple ceremony with 10 miners as witnesses. Sarah wearing her trail-worn clothes and Jake standing proud despite the dust. No white dress, no church bells, but the preacher's words had never rung truer, for better or worse, in plenty and in want. Now they stood on land that could be theirs, if they had the courage to claim it. "The Homestead Act applies here," Jake said, coming to stand beside her. "We file the claim, improve the land. It's ours in 5 years." 5 years. Sarah tested the words. "Think we can last that long? Think you can stop us?" She smiled at that, leaning into his solid warmth. They'd learned each other's rhythms on the trail, when to push, when to be gentle, when silence said more than words. Jake still woke some nights, haunted by old ghosts, and Sarah would hold him until the trembling passed. She still lit a candle each evening, a small flame in the darkness, and he understood without asking. They made camp by the river, and that night Jake surprised her from his saddlebag. He produced something wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a small glass lantern, somehow intact despite their travels. "Found it at that last trading post," he said, suddenly shy. "Thought you might want—" Sarah's throat closed. She took the lantern with reverent hands, running her fingers over the brass fittings. "It's perfect." That night she lit it, setting it on a flat stone where it could be seen from the trail. Not for Thomas now, he was safe, rebuilding their childhood home. Not for anyone lost. This light was for the future, for anyone who might need shelter, for the home they would build together. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A small wagon train, heading for Oregon, had camped 2 miles downriver. Their wagon boss, A grizzled man named Ezra Holbrook rode up to investigate the new neighbors. Planning to settle? He asked, eyeing their setup with experienced eyes. Planning to try, Jake replied. Holbrook nodded slowly. Good land here. Blackfeet pass through sometimes, but they're mostly peaceful if you're respectful. Water's reliable. Seen deer sign everywhere. He paused. You folks running from something, or toward something? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Both. Does it matter? Not to me. Every soul out here's got a past. Holbrook shifted in his saddle. We're laying over tomorrow, resting the oxen. Got a man knows some carpentry. If you need help raising anything, fair trade for fresh meat, if your man can hunt. It was the beginning. Jake brought down an elk that afternoon, and true to his word, Holbrook's people helped them raise the frame of a small cabin. Nothing fancy, just one room to start, but solid and true. Women from the train shared precious seeds from their stores, advice about the climate, warnings about the winter winds. You'll need more than love to keep warm come January. Mrs., Patterson said tartly, but she smiled as she said it. This buffalo robe was my mother's. Call it a wedding gift. When the wagon train moved on, Sarah and Jake were left with the skeleton of a home and the kindness of strangers. They worked from dawn to dusk, chinking logs, building furniture from deadfall, preparing for winter they knew would test them. A month in, as the first cabin wall was complete, they had less welcome visitors. 3 men, hard-faced and travel-worn, approaching from the south. Jake saw them first, reaching for his rifle. Easy, the lead rider called. Just passing through, looking for someone. Actually, man named Garrett, Jake Garrett. Sarah's blood chilled, but Jake stepped forward calmly. You found him. State your business. The rider studied him. My name's Morrison. Federal marshal out of Denver. Got paper here says you're wanted for questioning about gun running on the Cunningham outfit. Cunningham's the gun runner. I tried to stop him. So you say. Still need you to come in. Tell it to a judge. Morrison's hand rested on his pistol. Can do this easy or hard. Garrett. Sarah moved to Jake's side, her own rifle ready. He's not going anywhere. Morrison's eyes flicked to her. Ma'am, I'd advise you to listen. Jake interrupted. I'll tell you about Cunningham. Here, now. But I'm not leaving my wife and my land with winter coming. The marshal's partners stirred restlessly, but Morrison held up a hand. For the next hour, Jake laid out everything. Cunningham's operation, the wagon train, the attempted murder. Sarah added her own account of the attack on her homestead. Morrison listened, occasionally asking sharp questions. Finally, he tucked his notebook away. Here's the thing, Garrett. Your story matches what we've been hearing. Cunningham's disappeared, but his operation's fallen apart. Men turning on each other, talking to save their own necks. He stood, adjusting his gun belt. I'm satisfied you were trying to do right, but if Cunningham surfaces, if this comes to trial, you'll need to testify. I'll be here. Jake said simply, building something worth protecting. Morrison looked around at their half-built cabin, the cleared land, the lantern sitting ready for nightfall. Something in his expression softened. See that you are... He touched his hat to Sarah. Ma'am, you got a good man here. See you keep him honest. I intend to. After they left, Jake sat heavily on a stump, tension draining from him. Sarah knelt beside him, taking his hands. It's not over, he said. Cunningham's still out there. The past is past. She gripped his hands tighter. We've got today. We've got tomorrow. That's enough. As autumn deepened, their cabin took shape. The walls went up strong and straight. Jake split shingles while Sarah daubed chinking. They worked in companionable rhythm, learning the language of shared labor. Neighbors appeared occasionally. A trapper sharing news. A settler family trading vegetables for ammunition. Slowly, they were weaving themselves into the fabric of the frontier. The first snow came early, a light dusting that turned the valley into a wonderland. Sarah stood in their doorway, their door, their home, watching Jake tend the horses. The lantern hung from a peg beside the entrance, ready for lighting. "You know," Jake said, coming to join her, "I never thanked you proper." "For what?" "For lighting that lantern. For giving a lost man a place to land." He pulled her close. "For being too stubborn to let me go." "You saved yourself," Sarah said. "I just opened the door." "No." His voice was serious. "No. You did more than that. You gave me a reason to stop running. A reason to build instead of destroy." Sarah thought of her own salvation, how Jake had pulled her from the ashes of her old life, helped her find strength she'd never known she possessed. They'd saved each other. Maybe salvation wasn't about rescue at all. Maybe it was about choosing to build something new from the broken pieces. That night, the first blizzard howled down from the mountains, but inside their small cabin, fed by the fire Jake had built and wrapped in Mrs. Patterson's buffalo robe, they were warm, safe, home. Sarah lit the lantern despite the storm, setting it in the window they'd cut facing the trail. The light flickered but held steady, a small defiance against the wild darkness. "Think anyone will see it?" Jake asked, watching the snow swirl past. "Maybe, maybe not." Sarah settled against him. "But it's there if they need it." They sat together, listening to the storm, planning for spring. They'd need to clear more land, plant crops, maybe add a room to the cabin. Jake talked about raising horses. Sarah about keeping chickens again. Simple dreams, but precious for their simplicity. Somewhere out there, Thomas was rebuilding their childhood home, keeping his own light burning. Somewhere, Cunningham might still plot revenge. The world held no shortage of darkness. But here, now, in this cabin built by their own hands, love was enough to hold the shadows at bay. The lantern burned on, patient and steady, a promise that some lights endure no matter how fierce the storm. Sarah had lit it first for her brother, a beacon of desperate hope. Now it shone for different reasons: welcome for the weary, warning for the wicked, and witness to the truth that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born to. In the Montana Territory, on a winter night when the temperature dropped low enough to freeze breath in the air, Sarah McKenna Garrett and her husband held each other close and built their future one day at a time. The lantern glowed in the window, and though the flame was small, it was enough. It had always been enough. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the valley in pristine white. Come morning, they would dig out, tend the stock, continue the endless work of survival. But for now, they rested in each other's arms, two souls who had found their way through darkness to this moment of perfect light. The lantern burned on, and in its gentle glow, love wrote its own ending to their story, not with grand gestures or final victories, but with the quiet certainty that some things, once kindled, can never be extinguished. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. Where are you enjoying this story from? Let us know in the comments below so we can connect with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Sarah and Jake's journey. Your comments help us bring more of these frontier stories to life.